The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the Broken Arrow Ranch just as the sun began its descent behind the Montana mountains. And when Clara Whitfield stepped down onto the dusty earth, every muscle in her body screamed in protest, from the bruises hidden beneath her long sleeves and high collar. She had traveled 3 weeks from St. Louis, answering an advertisement for a cook and housekeeper position that promised room, board, and a fresh start far away from the life she was desperate to escape. The year was 1882, and Montana Territory represented the edge of civilization, a place where a woman could disappear and remake herself if she was brave enough or desperate enough to try. Clara was both. The ranch house stood 2 stories tall, constructed of weathered timber that had turned silver gray under the relentless sun and harsh winters. Behind it stretched corrals and outbuildings, and beyond those, rolling grassland that seemed to touch the sky. The air smelled clean, like sage and pine, nothing like the coal smoke and river stench of the city she had fled. A man emerged from the barn, tall and lean, with shoulders broad enough to suggest strength without bulk. He wore dusty work clothes, a worn leather vest, and a hat that shadowed his face until he came closer. When he removed the hat, Clara saw a face weathered by sun and wind, probably somewhere in his late 20s, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a jaw that suggested stubbornness. "Miss Whitfield?" His voice was deep, careful, as though he was unused to speaking to women, or perhaps just unused to speaking much at all. "Yes, sir. I am here about the position." Clara kept her chin up, despite the pain radiating through her ribs where the bruises were darkest. "Name is James Holloway. I own this place." He extended his hand, and Clara shook it briefly, trying not to wince when the movement pulled at her sore shoulder. But James was observant in the way men who work with animals learn to be, and his eyes narrowed slightly. "Let me help with your trunk." He moved toward the stagecoach driver, who was already hefting down her single battered trunk, everything she owned in the world, fitting into that one piece of luggage. As Clara reached up to adjust her bonnet, her sleeve slipped down several inches, revealing a bracelet of purple and yellow bruises around her wrist. She quickly tugged the fabric back into place, but not before James saw. His expression shifted, something dark passing behind his eyes. "Come inside," he said quietly. "You must be tired from the journey." The house interior surprised her with its tidiness, though dust motes danced in the amber light streaming through windows. The main room served as kitchen and living area combined, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and a long wooden table that could seat a dozen men. Stairs led up to what she assumed were bedrooms. James set her trunk down and turned to face her directly. His gaze moved over her in a way that made Clara instinctively cross her arms over her chest, but there was nothing predatory in his examination. He was looking at the way she held herself, the careful movements, the slight favoring of her left side. "Miss Whitfield, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." His voice was gentle but firm. "Who hurt you bad?" The question landed like a physical blow, and Clara felt her carefully constructed composure begin to crack. No one had asked her that. Not her neighbors in St. Louis, who had surely heard the shouting and the sounds of violence through thin walls. Not the minister's wife who had given her the newspaper with the ranch advertisement circled in pencil. Not the stagecoach driver who had helped her aboard with obvious bruises on her face that she had tried to hide with powder and a veil. "I do not know what you mean," she whispered, but her voice betrayed her with its trembling. James took a step closer, not threatening, but concerned. "I have worked with horses my whole life, ma'am. I know what fear looks like, and I know what hurt looks like. You are moving like you have broken ribs, and that sleeve slipped enough for me to see those bruises are recent." He paused and his jaw tightened. "So I will ask again, and this time I hope you will tell me the truth. Who hurt you bad?" Tears burned in Clara's eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She had promised herself she would not cry anymore, that she had left her tears back in St. Louis along with everything else. But something in James Holloway's voice, the genuine concern mixed with a barely contained anger that was clearly not directed at her, made the walls she had built around herself begin to crumble. "My husband," she finally said, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "My late husband." James's eyebrows rose slightly. "Late? He died 3 weeks ago. He was drunk, fell down the stairs, broke his neck." Clara's voice was flat, reciting facts. "I left the day after they buried him, I could not stay in that house another night, and his brother was already making noises about taking me in, about how families should stay together. She shuddered. His brother was worse than he was. The silence that followed felt heavy, but not uncomfortable. James studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The job is yours if you want it. I need someone who can cook for me and the ranch hands during branding and roundup seasons. Rest of the year, it is just me and my foreman, Samuel. He has a cabin on the north section. You would have your own room upstairs, door with a lock. I sleep downstairs in the room off the kitchen. I can cook, Clara said quickly, and clean and mend and do laundry. I will earn my keep, Mr. Holloway. James, he corrected, out here we do not stand much on formality. He moved to the stove, checking the firebox. Are you hungry? I was about to make some supper, but I will admit my cooking is not much to speak of, mostly beans and bacon and coffee strong enough to strip paint. Despite everything, Clara felt a small smile tug at her lips. I can do better than that. If you will show me the pantry, I will make us both something proper. The pantry proved to be better stocked than she expected, with sacks of flour and cornmeal, jars of preserved vegetables, smoked meat, and even some dried herbs. Within an hour, Clara had produced a simple but hearty meal of pan-fried potatoes with onions, bacon, and eggs, along with fresh biscuits that steamed when broken open. James ate with the focused intensity of a man who was genuinely hungry, and when he finished, he sat back with an expression of something close to wonder. Miss Whitfield, if you can cook like this regularly, I will consider myself lucky. Clara, she said softly, if you are James, then I am Clara. He nodded, and for a moment their eyes met across the table. Clara saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch, a warmth and kindness that she had nearly forgotten could exist in a man. James looked away first, clearing his throat. I should show you to your room. Tomorrow will be a long day. Samuel will be coming by, and I need to ride out to check the south pasture fence. You can settle in, get your bearings. He stood, picking up her trunk as though it weighed nothing. This way. The room upstairs was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over the grassland toward the mountains. James set down her trunk and pointed out the lock on the door, testing it to show her it worked. No one will bother you here, he said firmly. You have my word on that. After he left, Clara sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to cry, but these tears felt different from the ones she had shed in St. Louis. These were tears of relief, of release, of the first fragile hope she had felt in 3 long years of marriage that had been more prison than partnership. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn, a habit ingrained by years of fear and necessity. She dressed carefully, wincing as she pulled clothing over bruises that were beginning to fade from purple to green and yellow. When she came downstairs, she found James already in the kitchen, attempting to make coffee. Let me, she said, and he stepped aside with visible relief. As Clara worked, preparing breakfast of bacon, eggs, Johnny cakes with molasses, and proper coffee, James sat at the table mending a bridle. The domestic scene felt surreal to Clara, peaceful in a way she had never experienced. Her husband had never sat quietly while she worked. He had always been watching, criticizing, finding fault with everything she did. You got family back in St. Louis? James asked, not looking up from his work. No, my parents died when I was 16. Influenza? I married Roger 6 months later because I had nowhere else to go and no way to support myself. Clara flipped the Johnny cakes, watching them turn golden. I thought marriage would be safety. I was wrong. Not all men are like your husband, James said quietly. I know, but knowing something and believing it are different things. Clara brought the food to the table, and they ate in comfortable silence, broken only by the clink of utensils and the distant lowing of cattle. Samuel arrived mid-morning, a grizzled man in his 50s with kind eyes and a beard going gray. He treated Clara with old-fashioned courtesy, removing his hat and greeting her respectfully. James introduced her simply as the new housekeeper, and Samuel nodded as though having a woman on the ranch was the most natural thing in the world. I will be heading into town tomorrow, James told Samuel. Need to pick up supplies and check at the land office about those mineral rights. You need anything? Tobacco, if they have the kind I like, Samuel replied. And maybe some of those peppermint sticks if old Henderson still keeps them behind the counter. He glanced at Clara with a slight smile. With cooking like this, I might start finding more excuses to come up to the main house for meals. The days began to establish a rhythm. Clara rose early, prepared meals, cleaned the house, did laundry in the big copper tub out back, and slowly began to feel the constant tension in her shoulders ease. James was gone most days, working the ranch, but he always came back for dinner, and afterward they would sit on the porch as the sun set and talk. He told her about growing up in Texas, learning ranching from his father, and eventually heading north to Montana to establish his own place. She told him carefully edited stories about her childhood, about learning to cook from her mother, about the small happiness she could remember before her parents died and her life had taken its dark turn. What Clara did not expect was the way her heart began to respond to James's presence, the way her breath caught when he smiled at her, rare but genuine expressions of pleasure, the way her skin warmed when their hands accidentally brushed passing dishes at the table, the way she found herself watching him work with the horses, admiring the gentle patience he showed the animals, the quiet strength in every movement. She tried to suppress these feelings, telling herself it was too soon, that she was damaged goods, that no decent man would want a woman who came with her history. But James made it difficult. He fixed the loose board on the porch steps without being asked. He brought her wildflowers he found while riding the property, presenting them awkwardly as though unsure of the gesture. He asked her opinion about things, from what supplies to order to whether he should invest in breeding Herefords or stick with Longhorns. 2 weeks after Clara's arrival, a stranger rode up to the ranch. He was a large man, broad and thick through the middle, with small eyes and a cruel mouth that Clara recognized immediately, even though she had only met him twice before. Robert Sullivan, her late husband's brother. Clara was hanging laundry when she saw him, and fear struck her like lightning. She dropped the sheet she was holding and ran for the house, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. She made it to the kitchen just as Robert dismounted in the yard. James was in the barn, too far away to reach quickly. Clara stood frozen, her hands shaking, as Robert's heavy boots thudded across the porch. He pounded on the door with meaty fists. "Clara, I know you are in there. Open this door." She backed away, looking wildly around for something, anything she could use as a weapon. Her hand closed around the cast-iron skillet, still sitting on the stove. "Clara, do not make this difficult. You are family, and you belong back in St. Louis. It is not proper, you running off like this, taking up with strangers." Robert's voice was thick with false concern that did not mask the threat underneath. "Your husband is barely cold in the ground, and here you are, shacking up with some cowboy. What would people say?" The door was locked, but Clara knew locks could be broken. She had seen Roger break down a door once in a drunken rage. She gripped the skillet tighter, her palms sweating. Then she heard another voice, cold and hard as iron. "Step away from that door, James." Clara ran to the window and saw him standing near the porch, and the rifle in his hands was not pointed at the ground. Robert turned, his expression shifting to false geniality. "You must be Holloway. I am Robert Sullivan, Clara's brother-in-law. I have come to take her home." "She is home," James said flatly, "and you are trespassing. Get on your horse and ride out. Now, see here. You have no right to keep a man's family from him. Clara is my responsibility now that my brother is gone." Robert's hand moved toward his hip, and Clara saw the gun holstered there. "Touch that gun, and it will be the last thing you do." James's voice did not rise, but the threat in it was unmistakable. "Clara works here of her own free will. She can leave any time she wants, but it will be her choice, not yours." "You do not understand what kind of woman she is," Robert said, and his voice turned ugly. "She probably came here with some sob story about my brother, but Roger was a good man. If he had to discipline his wife now and then, it was because she drove him to it with her nagging and her cold ways." Clara saw James's knuckles go white on the rifle. "I am going to count to 10, Sullivan. If you are not on that horse and headed down the drive by the time I finish, I am going to shoot you for trespassing. And out here, a man has the right to defend his property and the people on it. You are making a mistake, Holloway. Clara is a liar and a troublemaker. You will regret taking her in. 1, 2, 3. Robert's face flushed dark red. He looked at the house, and Clara saw the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of options. Then he spat on the porch boards and turned to his horse. "This is not over, Clara," he shouted toward the house. "You cannot hide forever." 10, James said, even though he had only counted to 3. The rifle shot cracked across the yard, kicking up dust 2 feet from Robert's horse. The animal reared, and Robert struggled to control it, cursing. Then he spurred the horse hard and rode down the drive at a gallop. James watched until he was out of sight, then lowered the rifle and came to the house. Clara unlocked the door with trembling hands, still clutching the skillet. "He is gone," James said gently, setting the rifle aside. "Are you all right?" Clara shook her head, then burst into tears, great heaving sobs that she could not control. James hesitated only a moment before pulling her into his arms, careful of her bruises, letting her cry against his chest while he murmured soft assurances that she was safe, that he would not let anyone hurt her. When the storm of tears finally subsided, Clara pulled back, mortified. "I am sorry. I got your shirt all wet." "I do not care about the shirt." James's hands were still on her shoulders, steady and warm. "Clara, I need you to tell me the truth. Is that man dangerous? Will he come back?" "I do not know," Clara whispered. "Robert wanted Roger's house, his business, everything. But he also wanted me. He said things after the funeral about how I would be his now, how he would take better care of me than his brother did." She shuddered. "That is why I left. I was afraid of what he would do." James's jaw tightened. "He will not touch you, I promise you that. But we should probably go into town and talk to the sheriff, let him know what is going on. If Sullivan comes back and causes trouble, I want it on record that you are here legally and he is harassing you." The next day, James hitched up the wagon, and they rode into the nearby town of Copper Creek, a bustling settlement that served the surrounding ranches and the mining operations in the mountains. The sheriff's office was a small building near the center of town, and Sheriff Tom Brennan proved to be a weathered man in his 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. James explained the situation while Clara sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. When James finished, the sheriff turned to Clara. "Ma'am, is what James says true? This man Sullivan is threatening you?" "Yes, sir," Clara said softly. "My husband was not kind to me. He drank, and when he drank he used his fists. His brother is cut from the same cloth, only worse." Sheriff Brennan nodded slowly. "I have seen your type of situation before, Mrs. Sullivan, and it grieves me to say it is all too common. Now, legally, you were married to Roger Sullivan when he died, which means you have inheritance rights to his property. His brother cannot just claim you like you are a piece of furniture." "I do not want anything from Roger," Clara said quickly. "I just want to be left alone." "That is your right," the sheriff agreed. "But you might want to think about seeing a lawyer, making sure everything is settled proper so Sullivan cannot use property claims as an excuse to harass you." He looked at James. "As for you, Holloway, you were within your rights to run him off your land, but be careful. Men like Sullivan do not take kindly to being crossed, especially by someone they think is beneath them." After leaving the sheriff's office, James took Clara to the general store, where he insisted on buying her fabric for new dresses, saying the ones she had were too worn for Montana winters. Clara protested, but James was stubborn. "You are working for me, and part of your pay is room and board," he said firmly. "That includes proper clothing. Besides, winter here is brutal. You will need warm things." While the storekeeper measured and cut fabric, Clara wandered the aisles, marveling at the abundance. She selected thread and needles, and James added them to the growing pile without comment. Then his hand appeared beside her, adding a small jar of hard candies. "What are those for?" she asked. "For you. Thought you might like them." He looked almost embarrassed. Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest. "Thank you, James. You are too kind to me." "Not kind enough," he said quietly, so low she almost missed it. The ride back to the ranch was peaceful, the wagon rolling through grassland turned gold by late summer sun. Clara felt something shift inside her, a loosening of the fear that had been her constant companion. Sitting beside James on the wagon seat, their shoulders occasionally brushing with the movement, she felt safe in a way she had never experienced. "James," she said hesitantly, "why did you hire me? You must have had other applicants." He was quiet for a long moment, his hands steady on the reins. "You want the truth?" "Always." "I saw something in your letter. Under all the proper words and careful phrases, I could feel your desperation. You needed help, and I needed help. Seemed like a fair trade." He glanced at her, his gray eyes serious. "But I will admit, I did not expect to like you as much as I do." Clara's heart skipped. "You like me?" "More than like. if I am being honest." James looked back at the horses, his jaw tight. "But I know it is too soon for you. I know you have been through hell, and the last thing you need is another man trying to claim you. So I am trying to be patient, trying to be respectful. But Clara, you should know that I care about you. A great deal." The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw. Clara felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different tears. "I care about you too," she whispered. "I did not think I could feel this way again, did not think I would ever want to. But you are different, James. You are everything Roger was not." They did not speak for the rest of the journey, but when James helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingered on her waist, and when she looked up at him, she saw in his face the same longing she felt in her own heart. The days grew shorter as August gave way to September, and the work on the ranch intensified. James and Samuel spent long hours preparing for the coming winter, repairing buildings, cutting hay, checking the herd. Clara worked equally hard, preserving vegetables from the small garden behind the house, sewing the new dresses James had bought fabric for, and cooking hearty meals to fuel the men's labor. In the evenings, she and James continued their ritual of sitting on the porch. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. One night, James reached over and took her hand, his rough palm warm against hers. Clara laced her fingers through his, and they sat like that until the night grew too cold to stay outside. "Clara," James said as they stood to go in, "I want to court you proper. I know it is soon, and I know you need time, but I want you to know my intentions are honorable. When you are ready, if you are ever ready, I would like to see if this thing between us could grow into something more." Clara looked up at him, this good man who had given her safety and kindness and was now offering her his heart. "I would like that too. But James, I am not sure I know how to be with a man in a good way. All I know is fear and pain and walking on eggshells. What if I am too broken?" He cupped her face gently in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. "You are not broken, Clara. You are healing. There is a difference." Then he leaned down and kissed her forehead, a chaste touch that nevertheless sent warmth flooding through her entire body. The courting that followed was gentle and careful, James always conscious of Clara's boundaries, never pushing, never demanding. He brought her flowers from the meadow. He taught her to ride, putting her on his gentlest mare and walking beside her until she grew confident. He held her hand during their evening talks, and sometimes, when she gave him permission, he kissed her cheek or her forehead. Clara bloomed under this tender attention. The fear that had lived in her eyes began to fade, replaced by light and laughter. She caught herself singing while she worked. She smiled more easily, and slowly, gradually, she began to understand that love did not have to hurt, that a man's hands could be gentle, that partnership could mean support rather than subjugation. 6 weeks after Clara's arrival at the ranch, Robert Sullivan returned. This time he did not come alone. He brought 3 men with him, rough-looking characters who were clearly hired guns. They rode up at dusk when James was in the barn finishing evening chores. Clara saw them from the kitchen window and felt ice flood her veins. She ran to the barn, her skirts flying. "James, he is back," and he brought men with him. James's face went hard. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the barn door, positioning himself where he could see the riders, but had cover. "Clara, get in the house and lock the door. If shooting starts, you get down on the floor and stay there." "I am not leaving you," Clara said stubbornly. "Clara, no, I have run from him twice already. I will not do it again." James looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. He nodded once, then handed her a revolver from his gun belt. "Do you know how to use this?" Roger kept a gun. He used to wave it around when he was drunk. "I learned where the safety was and how to aim." Her hands were steady as she took the weapon. Robert and his men stopped in the yard, spreading out in a semicircle. Robert had a smug expression on his face, clearly confident that numbers were on his side. "Holloway, send Clara out. This does not have to get ugly." "It is already ugly," James called back. "You are trespassing, Sullivan, and I have witnesses that you have been warned before. The sheriff knows all about you. If you start trouble here, you will hang." "The sheriff is a 2-day ride away," one of the hired guns said, a lean man with a scar across his face. "Lot can happen in 2 days." "Maybe so," said a new voice, "but you will be dead long before the sheriff gets here." Samuel emerged from the shadows near the corral, his own rifle leveled. Behind him came 3 more men, ranch hands from the neighboring property. Robert's confidence visibly wavered. "This is none of your concern, Samuel. When someone threatens the Broken Arrow, it is my concern. I have been foreman here for 10 years. This is my home, and Clara is under our protection." Samuel's voice was flat and cold. "Now, I suggest you and your hired trash ride out while you still can." The standoff held for a long moment, tension crackling in the air. Then one of Robert's hired men shifted his horse, and everything exploded into motion. The man went for his gun. James's rifle cracked, and the man fell from his saddle with a scream, clutching his shoulder. Samuel fired almost simultaneously, his shot taking the hat off another of the hired guns. The remaining gunman threw up his hands, clearly wanting no part of the fight. Robert's horse reared as another shot kicked up dust near its hooves. James had levered another round and was aiming directly at Robert's chest. "Next one goes through you," James said, his voice deadly calm. Robert looked around wildly, seeing his hired guns bleeding or surrendered, seeing the rifles pointed at him from multiple directions. His face went purple with rage. "You will regret this, Holloway. Both of you will regret this. I will see you ruined, you hear me? I will go to every rancher in this territory and tell them what kind of woman she is, what kind of man you are for harboring her." "Do what you want," James said, "but if you come onto my land again, I will kill you. That is not a threat, Sullivan. It is a promise. Now ride." This time Robert did not argue. He wheeled his horse and rode hard, his remaining gunmen scrambling to follow. The wounded man was hauled onto his horse by Samuel's men and sent after them. When the dust settled, James lowered his rifle and turned to Clara. She was still holding the revolver, her hands shaking now that the danger had passed. "Come here," James said softly, and she went to him. He wrapped his arms around her, and she pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his scent of leather and horses and safety. "It is over," he murmured into her hair. "He will not come back, not after this." "How can you be sure?" "Because men like him are cowards at heart. He tried to intimidate you, and when that did not work, he tried to use force. Now he knows force will not work either. He will slink back to St. Louis and find someone else to bully." Samuel approached, his rifle over his shoulder. "You all right, ma'am?" Clara nodded, pulling back from James to smile at the older man. "Thank you, Samuel. Thank you all. No thanks needed. You are part of this ranch now, just like the rest of us." Samuel's weathered face creased in a rare smile. "Besides, we would do just about anything to keep eating your cooking." The tension broke, and everyone laughed. The neighboring ranch hands stayed for coffee and pie, Clara's hands steady as she served them, and the conversation turned to the weather and cattle prices and whether the first snow would come early this year. After everyone left and the house was quiet, James and Clara stood on the porch, looking out at the night. "I want to ask you something," James said, "and you can say no, and it will not change anything between us. You will still have a place here, and I will still respect you and care for you." Clara's heart began to pound. "What is it?" James turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Marry me, Clara. Not because you need protection, though I will always protect you. Not because you need a home, though this will always be your home. Marry me because I love you, because I want to wake up every morning with you beside me, because I want to build a life with you, have children with you, if God wills it, grow old with you." Clara felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I love you too, James. I never thought I would say those words and mean them, but I love you with everything I am. Yes, I will marry you." James let out a breath he seemed to have been holding and pulled her into his arms, kissing her properly for the first time. It was everything their previous chaste kisses had not been, deep and passionate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I want to do this right," James said. "I want to marry you in a church with witnesses and make it legal and binding so no one can ever question it. We can go to Copper Creek next week, talk to the minister." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Copper Creek, with Samuel standing up as best man and the minister's wife serving as witness. Clara wore a new dress of deep blue wool that brought out her eyes, and James wore his Sunday best, his hair slicked back and his boots polished. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and James kissed her in front of God and the few witnesses, Clara felt something inside her that had been broken begin to mend. This was what marriage was supposed to be, a partnership built on love and respect, not fear. The wedding supper was held at the ranch, Samuel and several neighboring families joining them for a feast Clara had spent days preparing. There was roasted beef and potatoes, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden, and 3 different pies. The small house rang with laughter and music, someone producing a fiddle and another a mouth harp, and James swept Clara into a dance despite her protests that she did not know how. "Just follow me," he murmured, and she did, letting him guide her around the cleared space in the main room, feeling safe and cherished in his arms. When everyone finally left and they were alone, James carried her up the stairs to what was now their bedroom. He had moved his things in earlier, combining their belongings in the larger room that overlooked the mountains. He set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "Clara, I need you to listen to me. I know what your marriage to Sullivan was like. I know you have reason to fear what comes next. But I promise you, I will never hurt you. If you need me to go slow, I will go slow. If you need me to stop, I will stop. Your comfort and your happiness mean more to me than anything else." Clara felt fresh tears prick her eyes at his gentleness. "I trust you, James. I am not afraid, not anymore." What followed was a revelation to Clara, a discovery that physical love could be tender and mutual and joyful rather than painful and one-sided. James was patient and careful, making sure she felt pleasure before seeking his own, holding her afterward with infinite tenderness while she cried happy tears against his chest. "I did not know it could be like that," she whispered. "It will always be like that between us," he promised. "Always." The winter that followed was brutal, Montana living up to its reputation with snowstorms that buried the ranch under feet of white, and temperatures that dropped so low the water in the trough froze solid. But inside the ranch house, warmth reigned. Clara and James settled into married life with surprising ease. They worked side by side during the day, James handling the animals and maintenance while Clara managed the house and meals. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, James reading aloud from books or newspapers while Clara sewed or knitted, preparing for the baby she had discovered was coming when the first snows fell. James was overjoyed at the news, his face lighting up with such pure happiness that Clara could not help but cry. He became even more protective, insisting she rest more, not lift anything heavy, bundle up warm when she went outside. "I am not made of glass," she protested laughingly when he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry. "No, but you are carrying something precious, and I will not take chances with either of you," he said firmly, taking the basket from her. The baby came in early June, delivered with the help of a midwife from town, and Samuel's wife Martha, who had come to stay at the ranch for the last month of Clara's pregnancy. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when James, pacing downstairs, feared he would lose her. But Clara was stronger than anyone knew. When the baby's first cry rang out, James burst into the room, despite Martha's protests, and went straight to the bed, where Clara lay exhausted but smiling, holding a red-faced, squalling infant. "It is a boy," Clara said softly. "A son, James." James sat carefully on the edge of the bed, looking down at the impossibly tiny person his wife held. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused eyes, one miniature fist waving in the air. "He is perfect," James breathed. "You are perfect. Clara, I love you so much." They named him Thomas, after James's father, and he became the center of their world. James proved to be a devoted father, rising with Clara for nighttime feedings, even though he had to be up at dawn for ranch work, walking the floor with Thomas when he was fussy, talking to him in a soft rumble even though the baby could not understand. Clara watched her husband with their son and felt her heart overflow. This was the life she had dreamed of during those dark years with Roger, a life she had thought was forever beyond her reach. Safety, love, family, a future that stretched out full of hope instead of fear. Thomas was 6 months old when a letter arrived from St. Louis. Clara recognized the handwriting on the envelope as belonging to the minister's wife who had helped her escape, and her hands shook slightly as she opened it. The letter was brief but contained news that made Clara sink into a chair. Robert Sullivan was dead, killed in a barroom brawl after he drunkenly attacked another man. There would be no more threats, no more fear of him coming back to cause trouble. James found her sitting at the kitchen table, the letter in her hand, tears streaming down her face. "Clara, what is wrong? What happened?" "He is dead. Robert is dead. It is really over, James. Completely over." She looked up at him, smiling through her tears. "I am free. Truly free." James pulled her into his arms, holding her, while she cried tears of relief and release. The last shadow from her past was gone, burned away like morning mist under the Montana sun. The years that followed were full and good. Thomas grew into a sturdy, cheerful boy, with his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn determination. 2 years after Thomas was born, Clara gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, who proved to have her father's gray eyes and a personality that combined sweetness with steel. 3 years after Sarah came, another son, Michael, who was quiet and observant and loved animals the way his father did. The ranch prospered under James's management, growing from a modest operation to one of the most successful in the territory. Clara's cooking became legendary, and during roundup season, ranch hands came from miles around, hoping to be hired on at the Broken Arrow just for the chance to eat her meals. Samuel remained with them, growing older, but no less devoted to the ranch. He became like a grandfather to the children, teaching them to ride and rope and all the skills they would need. His wife Martha became Clara's closest friend, the two women sharing everything from recipes to advice about child rearing. On their 10th wedding anniversary, James took Clara into Copper Creek for a rare day away from the ranch and the children. They had dinner at the hotel restaurant, walked along the main street, and visited the same church where they had been married. Standing in the sanctuary, Clara looked at the man beside her and marveled at how much her life had changed. The bruises that had covered her body when she first arrived at the Broken Arrow were long faded, replaced by the marks of a life well lived, calluses from work, laugh lines around her eyes, the soft roundness that came from bearing children and being well fed and content. "What are you thinking?" James asked, taking her hand. "I am thinking about the day I arrived, how scared I was, how broken I felt, how you asked me who hurt me bad, and I thought I would never be able to answer that question without falling apart." She squeezed his hand. "I am thinking about how you saved me, James, not just from Robert, but from believing that I was not worth saving. You saved yourself, Clara. You had the courage to leave, to start over, to trust again. I just gave you a safe place to heal. You gave me everything," she said softly. "Love, home, family, a future. You showed me what a real man is, what real love looks like. I wake up every morning grateful that I answered your advertisement, grateful that the stagecoach brought me to your door." James pulled her into his arms right there in the church, holding her close. "I am the grateful one. The day you stepped off that stagecoach was the day my life truly began. Everything before that was just waiting for you." They stood like that for a long moment. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a love that had weathered every storm. Outside, Montana spread around them in all its wild beauty, mountains touching the sky, grassland rolling to the horizon, big enough to hold all their dreams and all their tomorrows. When they returned to the ranch that evening, the children ran out to meet them, Thomas at 12, already tall and rangy, Sarah at 10, full of energy and questions, and Michael at 7, quiet but smiling. James swept them all into a group embrace, and Clara stood back for just a moment, imprinting the scene in her memory, her family, her home, her life. She had arrived at the ranch with bruises everywhere, broken and afraid, expecting nothing but a job and a place to hide. Instead, she had found everything she never dared to hope for. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Clara and James sat on the porch, as they had done countless times before. The stars were brilliant overhead, the air cool with the promise of autumn. James had his arm around her shoulders, and she was nestled against his side, their bodies fitting together with the ease of long familiarity. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked suddenly, "taking a chance on a woman you did not know, someone who came with so much trouble." James was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was warm with affection and absolute certainty. "Not for one single second. You are the best decision I ever made, Clara Holloway. The very best." She turned her face up to his, and he kissed her gently, a kiss that held 10 years of love and partnership, and the promise of all the years still to come. The Montana night wrapped around them, vast and beautiful and full of stars, and in the warmth of their embrace, the last ghost of Clara's painful past finally faded away completely, leaving only the bright, shining reality of the present and the future they would build together. The children grew and thrived, Thomas developed into a natural horseman and rancher, already talking at 15 about the improvements he wanted to make to the ranch when he was older. Sarah shocked everyone by declaring she wanted to be a teacher and began saving money from selling eggs and her needlework to pay for schooling. Michael proved to have a gift with animals that surpassed even his father's, able to calm the most fractious horse or skittish cow with just his presence and quiet voice. Clara watched her children become their own people, with a mixture of pride and bittersweet awareness of time passing. She and James were in their early 40s now, their bodies showing the marks of hard work and mountain winters, but their love had only deepened with time. They still sat on the porch every evening when weather allowed. They still held hands across the dinner table. They still found moments to steal kisses when the children were occupied elsewhere. The passion of their early marriage had matured into something richer and more complex, a love that was woven through with shared history, mutual respect, and the deep contentment of two people who were genuinely partners in every sense of the word. When Montana achieved statehood in 1889, there was a celebration in Copper Creek that lasted 3 days. The whole family went, and Clara stood on the main street watching the parade, surrounded by her husband and children, and felt a fierce swell of belonging. This was her state now, her home, the place where she had been reborn. That evening, at the dance held in the town hall, James led her onto the floor for a waltz. Clara had learned to dance properly over the years, and they moved together smoothly, in perfect synchronization. "Remember our wedding dance?" James murmured. "You told me you did not know how. I was terrified I would step on your feet." Clara smiled at the memory. "I was terrified of so many things back then. You are not terrified anymore." "No, I am not." She looked up at him, this man who had been her salvation and her love for 12 years now. "I am grateful, and I am happy, and I am exactly where I belong." The music swelled around them, and other couples joined them on the floor, but Clara only had eyes for James. In his face, she saw her past, her present, and her future, all bound together in the love they shared. When Samuel retired at 70, Thomas stepped up to become foreman at just 21, proving he had inherited his father's skill and judgment. Samuel and Martha built a small house on the edge of the property and spent their days gardening, fishing in the creek, and being thoroughly spoiled by their adopted grandchildren. Sarah left for school in Helena at 17, breaking her mother's heart even as Clara was proud of her daughter's ambition and intelligence. Michael, at 14, was already talking about breeding programs and how to improve the ranch's bloodlines. The ranch house had been expanded over the years to accommodate the growing family, a new wing added, and the porch enlarged. Clara's kitchen was her domain, and she ruled it with efficient grace, still cooking meals that drew compliments from everyone who tasted them. On their 20th wedding anniversary, James surprised Clara with a trip to Helena to visit Sarah. It was the farthest from the ranch Clara had been since arriving in Montana 2 decades earlier, and she was nervous about the journey, but with James beside her, his hand holding hers as the train rolled through the mountains, Clara felt only excitement. Sarah met them at the station, looking grown up and sophisticated in her teacher's dress, and for 3 days they explored the capital city together, visiting museums and theaters and fine restaurants. On their last evening in Helena, after Sarah had returned to her boarding house, James and Clara walked through the city streets as the sun set, turning the mountains around them pink and gold. "Do you miss this?" James asked. "City life, with all its conveniences and culture?" Clara thought about it seriously before answering. "No, I appreciate visiting, and I am glad Sarah has this opportunity. But the ranch is my home. Montana is my home. You are my home, James. Everything that matters to me is there." They stood on a bridge over a small river, watching the water flow beneath them, and James pulled Clara close. "I love you more now than I did on our wedding day," he said. "I did not think that was possible, but it is true. Every year with you has been better than the one before." "I feel the same," Clara whispered. "You gave me a life I never dreamed I could have. You gave me myself back. I will never stop being grateful for that." They kissed as the stars began to emerge overhead, two middle-aged people who had built something beautiful from broken beginnings, whose love had weathered every storm and only grown stronger. The years continued their steady march. Sarah became a teacher in Copper Creek, returning home to everyone's joy, and eventually married a young lawyer from Helena who moved to Montana to be with her. Michael took over more and more of the day-to-day ranch operations as James's joints began to ache with age and old injuries. Thomas married a rancher's daughter from the next valley and built a house on the northern section of the property, starting his own family. Clara became a grandmother at 50, Thomas and his wife presenting her with a sturdy grandson they named James, after his grandfather. The cycle continued, life perpetuating itself in the next generation, and Clara held her grandchild with tears of joy streaming down her face. "Your grandfather and I started all of this," she told the baby, who stared up at her with solemn eyes. "We built this family from nothing but love and determination. You are the proof that good things can come from dark beginnings." James stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his own eyes wet as he looked at his namesake. "He is perfect. They are all perfect." More grandchildren followed, Sarah and Michael, adding to the growing brood. The ranch house that had once seemed too big for just James and Clara now rang with the sounds of multiple generations during holidays and Sunday dinners. Clara's hair went from brown to silver, and James's dark hair turned white. Their hands became gnarled with arthritis, their movements slower, but their love remained constant, a foundation that had supported them through 2.5 decades of marriage. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were nearly 30 people present now, children and grandchildren, in-laws and friends who would become family. Tables were set up outside under the Montana sky, laden with food that Clara and her daughters-in-law had prepared. Thomas stood to make a toast, his own son on his hip. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the gathering. "Dad built this ranch with his own 2 hands, but Mom made it a home. Together they created something that will last for generations. They showed all of us what real love looks like, what real partnership means. To James and Clara Holloway, the best parents and grandparents anyone could ask for." "To James and Clara!" the crowd echoed, raising their glasses. Clara looked around at all these faces, this family they had created, and felt overwhelmed by the fullness of her life. She thought about the woman she had been at 25, stepping off that stagecoach covered in bruises, thinking her life was over. She could never have imagined this, all of this abundance and love and belonging. James leaned over and kissed her cheek. "What are you thinking, my love?" "I am thinking that I am the luckiest woman in Montana," she said simply. "I am thinking that every hardship, every dark moment was worth it because it led me here, to you, to this life we built together." "We have had a good run," James agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "But we are not done yet. I plan to sit on that porch with you for many more years, watching the sunset over our land, holding your hand." And they did. The years gentled on, bringing the usual mixture of joy and sorrow that makes up a life fully lived. There were losses. Samuel passed at 82, slipping away peacefully in his sleep, and Martha followed him 6 months later, unable to bear life without her partner. There were triumphs. Michael's breeding program made the Broken Arrow famous throughout Montana for the quality of its cattle, and Sarah's students regularly won scholarships to universities back east. James and Clara celebrated their 40th anniversary with a quiet dinner, just the 2 of them, at the same hotel in Copper Creek, where they had gone for their 10th. They were both 70 now, their bodies worn but their minds sharp, their love undiminished by time. 40 years, Clara marveled. 40 years since I arrived at your ranch, broken and afraid, and you asked me who hurt me bad. And you stayed, and you healed, and you loved me, James said. Best 40 years of my life, Clara. I would not change a single moment. They held hands across the table, 2 old people who had traveled a long road together and found joy in every mile. Clara lived to see great-grandchildren, tiny people who carried forward the legacy she and James had built from nothing but determination and love. She remained sharp and engaged with life until the very end, still cooking Sunday dinners for the family, still tending her garden, still sitting on the porch with James every evening when the weather allowed. She passed away peacefully at 78 in her sleep, with James holding her hand the way he had held it for more than 50 years of marriage. Her last words to him were spoken that evening as they sat watching the sunset. "I love you, James Holloway. Thank you for giving me a life worth living." James followed her a year later, his heart unable to beat without its other half. He was found on the porch, sitting in their chair, facing the mountains that had framed their life together, a peaceful expression on his weathered face. They were buried side by side in the small cemetery outside Copper Creek, their headstones simple: James and Clara Holloway, beloved partners, together forever. The ranch continued, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story, but always remembering the foundation on which it was built. Thomas told his grandchildren about the day a woman stepped off a stagecoach with bruises everywhere, and a cowboy asked her who hurt her bad. And from that moment of compassion and connection, an entire legacy was born. The porch remained, weathered but solid, a testament to all the evenings two people had sat there, watching the sun set over Montana, holding hands, building a life one day at a time. The land endured, rolling grassland and distant mountains, big enough to hold all the dreams and hopes of those who worked it. And somewhere in the Montana wind, if you listened carefully, you could hear the echo of a love story that began with pain but blossomed into something beautiful and lasting. A reminder that even from the darkest beginnings, hope and healing and happiness can grow. Clara had arrived at the ranch with bruises everywhere, expecting nothing but shelter and work. Instead, she found everything: love, family, belonging, and a partner who saw past her pain to the strong, capable, loving woman beneath. James had asked who hurt her bad, but then spent the rest of his life showing her what love really meant, building with her a life so full of joy that the darkness of the past faded into insignificance. Their story lived on in the family they created, in the ranch they built, in the love that had sustained them through 53 years of marriage and continued beyond death itself. It was a testament to the transformative power of kindness, the healing that comes from being truly seen and valued, and the simple truth that love, real love, can overcome even the deepest wounds. The Broken Arrow Ranch remained a place of healing and hope for generations, just as it had been for Clara when she first arrived. The name itself became synonymous with second chances and new beginnings, a reminder that sometimes the hardest journey leads to the sweetest destination. And through it all, through every season and every year, the Montana sky stretched overhead, vast and beautiful and eternal, watching over the land and the people who loved it, keeping the story of James and Clara Holloway safe in its endless memory.